Alright, so we're finishing up the suspension refresh on the MR2. After many of you provided feedback you prefer the voiceover format, I'm going to recap some of what's already been done. We start with disassembling the rear brakes, and little did I know that the fasteners have become one with the car.
Jesus Christ. I can't fucking get this thing off.
I know what the smart move is, and I'm not doing it. We can remove the axle nut and strut to free the assembly from the car. Now we remove the mid-pipe from the exhaust and the rear motor mount. The subframe can come out with all the outboard suspension attached. This is a good look at the current state of all the components. Everything was covered with penetrating oil and the impact still had a tough time. We even had to use some advanced methods. I let the subframe soak in degreaser for a little bit while we were still inside making things worse. This time we used heat and tried to work a little slower so we could end up breaking this bolt too.
Yep. Fucking nice.
With everything off, we pressed out the spindle from the hub. We decided to just pop out the inner race of the bearing so it's easier to work on. The outer race had the retaining clip rusted in place, so this ended up being a huge problem. I actually had a friend help out by welding a washer to it to remove it. Next we begin pressing all the old bushings out of the linkages since those will be replaced too. This was just a matter of finding a socket the right size to press on the outside of the bushing, some heat, and a little bit of patience. Moving on to the brakes, we bled out all the brake fluid and removed the caliper. The handbrake cable was stuck, so it needed some convincing.
Oh yeah, that's good work. Look at that, it's smoking.
Next we carefully removed the nut holding the handbrake bracket on the caliper.
Fuck. That's not good. That is not a good thing.
While that's being dealt with, I decided it was actually time to try to improve something. We took the linkages and subframe and media blasted all the surface rust off of them. We decontaminated the surface, laid down some black powder coat, and post-cured it in our very advanced oven that's definitely not 3 kitchen ovens stacked together. Next we start cleaning up the other components. The rear caliper is disassembled and the rear knuckle needs the mating surface for the bearing protected. The bearing has a tight tolerance, so we don't want to remove any material or damage the surface. We coated the components and this gave us a first look at the finished product. The next step is to install the urethane bushings. This is straightforward. Just make sure to use plenty of assembly lube, otherwise the friction when the suspension articulates will tear apart the bushings. We 3D printed this tool to press on the outer race of the wheel bearing while it was being pressed in. We also had the bearing in the freezer. We also put the bearing in the freezer to condense it so it fit it a little bit easier. With the bearing all the way in,
Jesus.
we can install the retaining clip. The knuckle also has a solid bushing for the rear lower control arm that needs to be pressed in. Next was pressing in the spindle. We also kept this in the freezer to condense it. The trick here is to have something on the bottom supporting the inner race of the bearing, otherwise you can break the bearing. With everything refinished, we can start installing the subframe and attaching the linkages. Remember the assembly loop for any urethane bushings. This finally gives us an insight to what the final product is going to be. Now we move to the front of the car. The ABS sensor gave us a nice little preview of the condition of everything. We can disconnect the brake line and carefully capture all the fluid so it doesn't spill. Next we move the brake and the caliper bracket. We got lucky and the bolts didn't even break this time. Disconnect the front tie rod and remove all the bolts holding the front spindle. I was very naive thinking the spindle will come out with just a couple taps. Next we can remove the bracing for the lower control arm. This bolt alone gave me so much trouble that I actually made a video about it. We can remove the rest of the bolts and move on to the control arm. We had to get drastic because no matter what we did, these bolts were not coming out. After a little cutting, we're able to finally remove the front assembly. With it out of the car, we have access to the lower ball joint.
Oh, I got it. fucking game's in the way.
Everything disassembled looked like this, then like this, and finally like this. The final piece to refinish this was the brake caliper, and with the magic of editing, it looks great. For the caliper, we need to remove the old piston seal, install the new one, and install the piston. After that, we just install the new dust boot. The new front spindle is much easier than the rear, luckily. We stack the spindle, dust shield, and the hub. Carefully tap it into place and start threading the bolts. We can also install the front caliper mount, only to remove it later because we forgot that rotors need to go on first. We need to grease the hole for the sliding pin for the caliper and install the new boot. Then we can install the sliding pin without getting too excited. Now we do the same exact thing to the opposite side of the car. The front control arms have a ball joint that's actually staked into it, so I had to order brand new control arms. I still want to upgrade to urethane bushings, so we had to remove the bushings that it came with. I ended up just melting them off of there, and in the process almost burning down my friend's garage.
Jesus.
Pressing in the urethane bushing was not easy. I ended up buying some hardware to make a makeshift clamp that ended up being the best method. Back in the car, we can remove the tie rods by disconnecting the boot and unscrewing it from the steering rack.
Yep, that's a lot easier.
My stupidity led to an Easter egg about the car. One of the front calipers is gloss dark gray, and the rest of them are flat black. That can just be between us though. Back in the rear, I ordered a new engine mount since the old one was so rusted.
I hope my stupid face wasn't in that.
59 foot-pounds. With everything on the car, we can start torquing it all to spec. I used a marker to mark everything I torqued. This helps me keep track of what was done. Also, I can check it easily after driving to see if anything backed out. I'm going to speed run this since I've shown the process many times before.
38 foot-pounds.
What's the rear mount torque to?
69 foot-pounds.
The camber bolts keep control of the rear camber by changing the angle. I just kept them straight since I was getting an alignment after this anyways.
64. 64 foot-pounds. 58 foot-pounds. 36 foot-pounds. 58 foot-pounds.
Back at the front, we can install the new tie rod. I did a rough comparison to get the alignment half decent so I could drive it to a real shop. The tie rod has this little spacer, and then a special tool is used to torque it down.
43 foot-pounds. Oh, Jesus.
Any urethane surfaces need to be lubricated, and then we can start installing the outboard suspension in the front. For the lower control arm, the bushings need to be sandwiched together like this. The bolt that gave me a lot of trouble, I ended up ruining the threads, so I chased it with a tap and hoped it would be good enough. We can continue with the front bracing. Next, we install the front hub. Then we can torque the front spindle.
41 foot-pounds.
The lower control arm.
54 foot-pounds. 64 foot-pounds. 55. 54.
And the caliper bracket so we can take it back off. Now we install the rotor and the caliper bracket.
80 foot-pounds.
The The lower ball joint just needs a clip in it. Next we install the front pads and caliper.
$25 foot-pounds.
Actually replace the old rubber lines with some stainless lines. Now we finish up the brakes in the back, pretty much the same process. While taking everything apart, I broke the ABS sensor, so that got replaced too. Now we reinstall the exhaust. The exhaust never really fit right, so that's going to be something we have to address in the future. I used a little hand vacuum to get the new brake fluid all the way through, but then after that, I just bled them the old-fashioned way. Finally, we install the wheels and torque the axle nuts. So we got the car rolling again. Next time, we're going to start working on the exterior a little bit. Thanks for watching.